I was late to meet my fiancé's billionaire mother because I stopped to help a bleeding groundskeeper. Then he took the head seat and said my name. If reveals like this pull you in, please like the video and subscribe to Family Fallout Stories 365 so you never miss the next twist. The email didn't arrive so much as appear, a summons on a judge's screen. MS. Lena Park is requested for formal dinner at the private residence of Vale Holdings. Requested, not invited. Ethan watched me from the kitchen island, hands around a cooling mug. It's my mother, he said. Regina doesn't do small talk, she does examinations. He slid a single sheet of rules, be exactly on time, navy blazer, minimal jewelry, no mention of community work, talk art, markets, do not improvise. Got it, I said, though my chest cinched. In the mirror I looked like a person rehearsing how to be someone else. The navy blazer fit, my mouth didn't. I thought of the kids at the garden and swallowed the urge to say that anything alive depends on patience, not punctuality. On the train out of the city, I traced the list until the ink smudged. Ethan texted, remember she hates late. The window threw back a version of me, hairpinned, spine straight, calm. I told myself I could perform for an hour without cracking. The station sat a mile from the estate. I chose to walk, to bleed off nervous heat. The air smelled like clipped boxwood and old money. My phone buzzed, I didn't look. Halfway up the lane, a branch lay across the verge. Beside it, a man in green coveralls tried to lift it and failed. He was older than my father, sun-leathered with a nick at his eyebrow weeping a thin line of red. I stopped before training Ethan's societies could pull me past. You okay? I asked. He squinted as if light hurt. I'll be fine, he said, pride, not truth. I dropped my tote, pulled the scarf from my neck, then thought better and shrugged off the blazer because the wind had teeth. Hold still. I tore a strip from a cotton handkerchief, my grandmother's trick, and pressed it to the cut until his face unclenched. I tucked the blazer around his shoulders. It's only an hour. You'll be late, he said, studying me with eyes that didn't miss much. Maybe, I said, but you're bleeding now. I handed him the sandwich I'd meant to eat on the platform. Turkey and apples, the kind I make when I'm trying to feel competent. He took it with both hands, careful like it might break. For a second, there was a look that didn't belong to a groundskeeper, appraisal, acute and quiet, then the wind took it away. By the time I reached the gates, my phone was a hive of messages. The V in black iron rose from stone like a verdict. I pressed the call button. Static, a breath, then a voice trained not to betray interest. MS Park. The gates shuddered and pulled apart as if deciding whether to admit a small storm. Ethan waited on the steps. His smile was a line. His eyes traveled and stopped where the blazer should have been. Where is it? He whispered. Behind him the door loomed, all carved oak. A man on the lane was hurt, I said. I gave him the coat, he was shaking. You can't be serious. His whisper sharpened. Do you understand where you are, what this is? My mother notices everything. I noticed someone bleeding, I said, and the steadiness in my voice surprised us both. He closed his eyes, then opened them on a different script, cool, managerial. Inside, smile, speak when spoken to, mention nothing except what's on the list. He took my hand and found it was not assenting. Lena, he said softer, please don't make this harder. From somewhere behind the door came the faintest chime. The handle turned from within. In the last beat before the world arranged itself around us, I thought of the man's eyes, how a person can look poor and still measure you. Rain ticked on the stone. The door opened. The butler's gaze landed, paused, and flicked to the absence on my shoulders as if logging evidence. MS Park, he said, they're waiting. The butler's face did not move, but his eyes did, one quick flick to my bare shoulders, then to Ethan's tight jaw, as if he had stamped both details and filed them. This way, he said, and the door shut behind us with the hush of money. Marble ran in perfect squares beneath a dome painted with saints of commerce. The house didn't breathe, it curated. Oil portraits stared down their long noses at my hairpins and my thrift store heels, and the air smelled faintly of wax and weathered leather, like a museum after closing. 17 minutes, Ethan hissed, falling into step beside me. You realize she times everything. She will make a note of this and never forget. I saw someone bleeding, I said. I didn't forget that. You could have called an ambulance, he snapped. There wasn't time. I kept my voice low. There was a man in front of me, not a spreadsheet. He pinched the bridge of his nose, the gesture of a boy dressing up in his father's worry. Please, he said softer. Don't do this thing where you make morality into a performance. Not here, not with her. Smile, edit, let me run the conversation. Run me, I said, and the words were too even to sound like a fight. I felt the old heat rise, the memory of a kitchen table with overdue bills fanned out like tarot, my mother saying, we don't own much, honey, but we own our names. I thought of the blazer wrapped around the groundskeeper's shoulders and tried not to think of my own skin goose-brickling in the Grand Hotel of a corpse. We turned a corner, and there it was, A corridor of paintings in heavy frames, each face holding a share of the family history like a stock certificate. At the far end stood a polished console. On it alone lay a small envelope upholstered in velvet the color of wine. My initials were stitched into the corner in tiny gold thread. LP. The butler stopped. He did not look at Ethan. He presented the envelope to me with a gravity normally reserved for court documents and marriage licenses. For MS Park, he said, per instruction. What instruction? Ethan asked. The butler's expression didn't alter. Per instruction, he repeated. MS Park is to open it after dinner. He said after dinner the way doctors say after surgery. The envelope was warm, as if someone had held it recently. A faint scent of white lilies rose off the nap, expensive, restrained, the kind of smell that means you have never hurried for a train. Along the velvet's edge, I noticed a thin smear the color of sap, as if touched by a hand that had worked outside. Ethan leaned in, voice barely a thread. Don't, it's a test. It's always a test. What isn't? I said, sliding the envelope into my tote, feeling its strange weight settle. Something rustled inside, paper, yes, and something else, soft and fine as a feather. A tiny shock ran through me, not fear so much as recognition, like hearing your name spoken by a stranger in another room. We moved on. The foyer opened into a gallery where sculptures stood like patient jurors. Keep your answers short, Ethan whispered. No policy lectures. If she asks about your job, pivot to books. She respects canon. What do you respect? I asked before I could leash it. My mother, he said, reflex and reflexive lie, because what he respected was the power that moved inside her like weather. He caught himself. I respect you, please, Lena. The butler paced us like a metronome, and I had the sudden sense he could hear every word without betraying a single one. At a pair of tall doors ribbed with carved vines, he paused, placed a discreet hand on the brass. When you enter, he said, you will proceed to your places. He looked at me then, the slightest tilt of the head, a deviation from perfect neutrality. Yours is to the right. Ethan let out a strained laugh. To the right of whom? The butler did not answer. In the gleam of the brass I saw myself, hair smoothed, throat bare, a woman carrying a velvet envelope she hadn't asked for, a woman who had already failed the rules and somehow received a place card anyway. Whatever happens, Ethan murmured, do not mention the walk, do not mention the man. The hinge began to move, a slow unfurling like a curtain rising. From inside came the hush of a room arranged for judgment, and a single voice, faint and low, finishing a sentence I couldn't make out, as if the conversation had started long before we arrived and would go on whether we passed the test or not. The doors opened, and the house exhaled us into the light. The doors swung wide as if pulled by a tide. Candles burned in tall silver, their flames steady in a room that had forgotten how to draft. A chandelier hovered like a net of stars. Lit, the light came from the margins, from sconces that made everything gold and suspicious. The table ran so far it seemed to thin in the distance. At its end, in a high-backed chair that could have been a throne or a witness box, sat a single figure in a dark suit. A jacket, my jacket, lay around those shoulders like a borrowed sky. I stopped dead. Ethan took one more step, realized I wasn't beside him, and reached back to tug without looking. Lena, he hissed. Moo. The figure at the head lifted a hand and took off the cap. The face beneath wasn't the sun-leathered old groundskeeper I'd bandaged on the lane. It was that face rinsed clean of dust, the angles sharpened by light, cheekbones like knives, a mouth that knew how to withhold, eyes with an old blue in them that had nothing to do with gentleness. MS. Park, the figure said, voice low, cultured, and unmistakably amused. Thank you for your kindness on the road. For a heartbeat, my brain refused the arrangement of facts. The bleeding man, the blazer around his shoulders, the smear of sap on the velvet envelope. The voice softened. I'm sorry for the disguise. It's useful to learn who people are when they think no one important is watching. Mother, Ethan said, and the word slid out of him wrong like a coin he'd swallowed by mistake. He stumbled a half-step, color draining to the edges of him. You were on the road. Regina Vale smiled in a way that didn't break the skin of her composure. Good evening, Ethan. She tapped the arm of her chair twice, a small metronome. Punctuality is a kindness too, but there are other kinds. The butler glided to my side. MS. Park, he said, tilting the slightest degree toward the right-hand chair beside the head. My chair. The wood gleamed, carved with vines that showed a patience I did not feel. I heard, from far away as if down a well, my father's laugh the day I brought home my first paycheck. You can't buy a good name, kiddo, you rent it with your choices. I took the offered seat. The leather was cool and caught under my palms. Ethan, still standing at the midpoint of the long field of linen, gathered himself. Mother, had I known I would have. What? Regina asked, not unkindly. Passed a different test. She turned to me. Up close, I could see the faint traces she hadn't bothered to remove entirely. A seam of darker tone at the hairline, the crescent of adhesive near the temple where a prosthetic had been. She had not been a man so much as an absence, a worker in a world that never makes eye contact with the hands that keep it trimmed. "Tell me," she said, "what you saw." "A person," I said. "Cold, bleeding, hungry. Nothing more." I knew what she was fishing for: pity, disgust, fear, calculation. I thought of the way the man's eyes had measured me, of the weight of the sandwich changing hands, of my grandmother wetting her thumb to scrub tomato sauce from my cheek before Sunday church. I saw an opportunity, I said, to be who I say I am. Regina's mouth made a shape that might have been approval in another species. Acceptable. She waved a hand, plates appeared, white and tall as fresh snow. "Ethan, sit." He took a chair not beside me and not opposite her, but farther down, a compromise that looked like surrender. When the soup came, it was perfectly clear, the flavor of discipline. Regina didn't ask where I'd gone to school or how many zeros sat in my savings account. She asked what I was reading. When I told her, she asked what I argued within it. She asked about the garden, about soil and patience, and why cucumbers turn bitter when rushed. She asked who had taught me to pack apples into a sandwich, and I said my mother, a nurse who worked nights and learned that acid and salt can wake a tired mouth. Ethan cleared his throat. "We brought Cabernet," he offered, reaching for a bottle the butler had already placed at his elbow. "The 08. Fruit before finish," Regina said, without looking. "Like charm before character." She turned the full attention of those pale eyes back to me, and the heat climbed into my face under it, not because I was ashamed, but because I recognized the instrument. This was a surgeon's gaze, evaluating whether the tissue would take a stitch. "Your blazer," she said. "Warm. It fit the person who needed it," I said. "And now?" "I'm warm enough," I said and meant it. Although a thread of fear stirred at the base of my skull, the old reflex of the scholarship kid who knows everything can be revoked if you embarrass the donor. Regina leaned back, the chair admitting her as if she were cut to its measure. "Ethan, you told me MS. Park had a habit of moralizing. I don't find sermonizing, I find sentences of proper length." Ethan's face pinched. "I never said." "You said exactly," she said, and it was the kind of correction that erases the future as well as the past. The butler lifted the cloche from the next course. On my plate lay something delicate and green with a ribbon of lemon over it, the kind of food that forgives no clumsy hand. I saw again the smear on the velvet envelope and felt the weight of it in my tote against my leg. There was paper inside, yes, but there had been something else, soft and fine as a feather. Regina followed my glance, casual as a cat. "Received a message, I believe." "Yes, and you followed the instruction." "Yes, good." She lifted her spoon and tasted the soup as if testing the room for salt. Then she set the spoon down with the sound of a small decision. "After dinner, MS Park, you'll open it." Ethan's head snapped toward me. "What envelope?" Regina did not break eye contact with me. "The one that decides whether we're discussing marriage tonight," she said, "or something quite different." The candle between us guttered and steadied. Somewhere in the quiet the house made, a clock began to count the seconds we had left before the course changed. Our apartment felt smaller after that house. Ceilings a little lower, light a little thinner, the city noise pressing its face to the glass. Ethan set his keys down like a confession that had lost its words. I put the velvet envelope on the coffee table. It didn't belong there. Nothing upholstered in velvet belongs on a thrifted IKEA knockoff. "Do you have to open it now?" he asked, voice stripped of posture. "It says after dinner," I said. "It's after dinner." He rubbed his thumb over his palm the way he did when numbers didn't add. "Whatever it is, we can fix it," I said. "Like a branch you tape back to a trunk it never grew from." He didn't answer. The kettle clicked on by habit, neither of us had touched it. The envelope gave when I slid my finger under the flap, a careful resistance like parting a seam you might have to stitch again. Inside, heavyweight paper, watermarked, the smell of something clean and expensive. Beneath the papers, something soft brushed my knuckles. A thin white petal, pressed flat, veined so fine it looked like frost. I set it aside on the table, a quiet mark from a different world. The first page was headed in a serif that had the authority of a courthouse, unlimited continuing guarantee. Guarantor, Lena Sun Park, for the indebtedness of Vale Hospitality SBV 12. The number of zeros on the line of credit was rude. A paragraph down, in perfect cursive, sat my name, electronic signature. Timestamped last Thursday at 1:14 p.m., the exact minute I'd been kneeling on asphalt chalking out bed lines with kids who asked if cucumbers could be taught to be sweet. My mouth went dry. "Ethan," I said, though what I meant was tell me this is a prank. He was already shaking his head, the truth arriving before the denial. It's a form, it's not." "A guarantee is not a form," I said. "It's a spine you loan to a stranger and hope he returns." My finger found a clause I'd only read about in other people's disasters. Waiver of notices, consent to jurisdiction, confession of judgment. Who even uses this language anymore? The next document was a monthly statement, accounts nested like Russian dolls. Fieldstone Holdings, a Vail-affiliated entity. Transfers labeled Bridge Facility, vendor retainer. Media advisory, money moving out to shell names with tasteful websites and no employees. In the lower corner, initials LG and EV repeated like a drumbeat. I didn't need a legend. Lyle, I said. Ethan sat. We were closing a hotel deal in Denver. The markets turned. We had holds short-term, Lena, everyone does it, and then the rate moved again and the timelines. So you borrowed my name. He flinched. We used delegated credentials for preliminary filings. Lyle said it was administrative, like adding you to a mailing list, just to keep options open until we could. Options open. I laughed, and it scared me because it didn't sound like me. Soldered my signature to $1 million machine so it could grind me to powder if your timelines slipped. A vibration startled the table. An unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The text arrived a second later. Unknown, we love the work you do at the garden. Shame about the restricted grants. Someone might ask where the money for pizza nights came from. Be smart. Don't drown for a story that isn't yours. They attached a screenshot, our tiny budget sheet. Red circles around 2 line items so small you'd miss them if you blinked. Snacks, mentor night, bus passes, youth summit. The implication was clear, misuse of restricted funds. It wasn't true we had permissions. But on a phone screen with red circles, truth doesn't matter for a week. I showed Ethan. He closed his eyes like the light was too much. I didn't. Lyle handles PR vendors. I never told anyone to. But they know my life, I said. They've lifted it like a rug to see what dirt they can find. The phone rang again. This time a real person when I answered, all courtesy and recorded lines. MS, Park, this is First Meridian Bank. Calling to confirm your appointment tomorrow at 9:30 for wet signature acknowledgement on the guarantee executed last week. We'll need a government ID and the device you used to complete the e-sign. I didn't execute anything, I said. The word execute cutting through. I never saw it. A pause in which I could hear the decision tree in the caller's head. If that is the case, MS, Park, you'll want to bring a police report number and fill out our affidavit of fraud. Please know the facility has an advance scheduled for noon tomorrow. If revocation isn't documented before funds move, you may be liable for. How did you get my signature? DocuTrack indicates it originated from a Vail Holdings workstation. Which one? I'm not authorized to disclose device specifics, she said, softened. But bring what you have and come early. The compliance director has blocked time. I thanked her. When I hung up, the room sounded like a memory of silence rather than the thing itself. The petal on the table that scalloped white looked like it could float a sentence if I put it on my tongue. Say something, I said. Ethan stared at the papers as if they were a fire he could go around. I messed up. Say the other part. He lifted his eyes. They were the eyes of the boy in the hallway outside freshman Econ, the one who had asked to borrow a pen and then stitched himself to my life. I was afraid, he said. I kept thinking if I moved fast enough I could keep you from seeing what I'd done until it was fixed. I thought that was protecting you. From the truth, I said, you were protecting yourself from me. He reached for my hand. I let him take it for one breath too, then I pulled back. You're going to tell your mother, I said. You're going to walk into that 8 a.m. meeting and say exactly what you did. And you're going to tell Lyle to bring every device that ever had my name on it. Lena, or I will, I said, and I will do it in a room that does not curate outcomes. He swallowed. Somewhere in my head my mother's voice was tallying groceries and grit. We don't own much, honey, but we don't sell our names to keep the lights on. Another ping. Unknown, careful, MS Park. You open this up and the kids lose their garden. Donors hate noise. Headlines are loud. I typed, do what you need to. I'll bring earplugs. Then I deleted it. Then I turned off notifications and took a picture of every page in the stack, each signature, each transfer memo, the petal between them like a white flag or a tooth. Ethan stood, paced 2 steps and stopped because there wasn't room to pace. If I tell her, he said, she'll do what's right with what's wrong, I said. You always told me that about her. Let's find out if you were right. He looked at the door like a man considering weather. The hallway outside hummed with the milky elevator and the neighbor's laugh-track TV. A floorboard near the kitchen cracked the way it always did when our building settled into its own cheap bones. Then the buzzer sounded. 3 short vibrations, a pause, then one long. The pattern delivery drivers used when no one answered the first time. The pattern Lyle had used once when he'd come by with tickets to a game I hadn't wanted to attend. Ethan and I looked at each other. Don't, I said. The buzzer went again, impatient, a fingertip that didn't believe in doors. The buzzer drilled the room a third time, then held like a finger that mistook insistence for authority. "Don't," I said again. Ethan stared at the intercom as if it were a decision he could postpone. "If it's Lyle and I don't answer, he'll come back with a story where we look uncooperative." "He already has a story," I said. "We're the characters who sign." The fourth press was shorter, polite. Then the phone rang the building line. Ethan picked up. "Yeah. Evening, Mr. Vale," the doorman said, all velvet. "A Mr. Lyle Grant for you." A pause, a professional cough that had hurt a lot. "He says it's time sensitive." Ethan glanced at me. I shook my head. He swallowed. "Send him up." The hallway's fluorescent hum preceded the knock. When the door opened, Lyle stood there in a coat too thin for February, smiling like we were all doing our best. He smelled faintly of a car that had been idling for an hour. "Lena," he said, hands up empty. "I'm here to fix panic before it becomes PR." "My panic has a name," I said. "Forgery," he winced. "That's a word you say to police, not friends. We had a timing squeeze. We used delegated auth for prelims to tee up the bank. No harm done if we clean it before noon. Which is why..." He reached carefully into his coat and pulled out a slim folder. "We'd love your wet signature tomorrow. It's an acknowledgement, nothing more, a belt for the suspenders." Ethan shifted, shame tugging his mouth. "Lyle, relax," Lyle said without looking at him. "I'm not the enemy, I'm the guy between you and a panic headline." He set the folder on the table with 2 fingers. "Banks love paper, paper loves signatures. We'll unwind the facility after the Denver wire hits. You'll never see a bill, you'll have done your fiancé a favor." He smiled at me like I should be grateful for this chance to be generous. "Say the quiet part," I said. "You attached my name without consent to $1 million guarantee because you were underwater and you thought I'd be too in love or too slow to notice." "Underwater is dramatic," Lyle said. "We were buoyant with ballast." I flipped the folder open. Same letterhead, same serif. A new page labeled Acknowledge and Reaffirm. I closed it like a lid on something that stank. "No," Ethan rubbed his face. "Lena." "No," I said again, with the calm I use when a teenager is holding a knife the wrong way at the garden. "You want me to notarize my own erasure. Not tomorrow, not ever." Lyle's smile cooled by 2 degrees. "You're overriding this, we all do things fast. Your nonprofit runs pizza nights on restricted grants, community engagement reported as program delivery. Donors get upset when the words don't match the pictures." "You don't know my books," I said. "And if you did, you'd know we have permissions." "Sure," he said. "And I have 13 emails from a junior who can't spell discretion." His eyes flicked to Ethan. "Look man, handle your household. I'm offering a bridge over an inconvenience." He leaned toward me. "You sign in the morning, we stop the bank run-up, we clean the docu track footprint, and in 2 weeks this is a boring footnote." "Fix what you broke," I said, without breaking me. I picked up the pressed petal from the velvet envelope, held it between 2 fingers so the veins flashed. "Your house loves symbols, Lyle. Here's one. This is the part of me that doesn't bend toward your convenience." He laughed once, small. "Regina's little theater trick really worked on you, huh? Costume changes, moral lessons, cute. Meanwhile, payroll happens on Fridays, if you want Ethan to have one." "Enough," Ethan said, sudden and raw. He looked at me, not at Lyle. "He's right about one thing. I did this because I was afraid, because I thought if I bought us 48 hours, the truth would be kinder by Monday." His mouth trembled. "It never is." Lyle watched him with a flatness that made me want to slam a door in the man's face. "So that's a no," he said to me, and when I didn't answer, he nodded like a waiter who'd heard we wouldn't be having dessert. He slid his card onto the folder. "In case you develop an appetite for practicality before 9. He moved to the door, then paused, hand on the knob. "One other thing," he said without turning. "Your building's doorbell cam, the cloud storage is sloppy. Some people pull those feeds. Might want to smile more when you're having dramatic porch conversations. Cameras hate tears." He opened the door. 8 a.m., he said to Ethan. "We'll see whether we're cleaning or cutting." Then he was gone. The hallway swallowed his steps. The apartment breathed again. I packed the papers back into their envelope, slid in my photographs, the petal on top like a seal. "I'm going to my parents," I said. Ethan's head jerked. "Tonight?" "I won't sleep here," I said. "Not while my name is on your table like a condiment you pass when convenient." He closed his eyes. "Let me drive you." "I'll take the train," I said. "You need to write what you're going to say at 8. He nodded. I stuffed 2 days of clothes into a canvas bag, the way you pack when you've done it before and always hoped you wouldn't again. At the door, I stopped. "You're going to tell your mother," I said. "All of it. If you don't, I will, and I won't do it soft." "I know," he said. When I turned the knob, his voice trailed me. "Lena, I'm sorry." I believed he meant it. I did not know yet whether the part of him that lies to himself could stop. The platform was colder than the street, the kind of cold that sits in the concrete because no one invites it inside. I stood under the orange light and read the bank email twice, then the doorman's messages, then the garden group thread where 2 kids were arguing about soil pH like it was a team sport. A woman in a nurse's jacket sat 3 seats down, head back, mouth open, asleep in the way that looks like surrender and is actually survival. My mother was waiting with the porch light on. She hugged me without asking and didn't ask because she knew answers given under pressure are just shapes you blow so your lungs don't burst. My father put a mug in my hand and turned the news up a notch to build a shell of noise around the space where my heartbeat was. "You can take my office," he said, meaning the room with the broken printer and the boxes of tax folders and the poster that says "Don't try me. I'm married to a nurse. Any man who shows up at this door tonight will leave with fewer teeth." "Dad," I said, and something unclenched. I lay on the narrow couch and stared at the dark window. The apartment across the street had left its blinds open. A blue television flickered over a wall of family photos, faces passing through blue. My phone buzzed. "Camille, you awake?" "Me, sort of." "Camille, call." I typed tomorrow, then erased it. "Now I sent." She answered on the first ring. "I saw the meeting photos," she said. "You looked like you were carrying dynamite in a purse." "There was an envelope," I said. "Of course there was," she said, because Camille knew the choreography of power almost as well as Regina did. "Listen, I have a friend who runs a boutique firm. They can smother a story before it grows legs. You won't like their tone, you'll like the results." "Who pays?" I asked. "Does it matter if it keeps your kid's garden open?" "It does," I said. "It matters exactly." Silence, then a sigh. "I can ask them to do it pro bono," she said, "but they'll ask who benefits if you tank Vale's stock by yelling fraud." "I don't care about Vale's stock," I said. "I care about not being a pen." "Okay," she said, softening. "Text me your doc screenshots, keep your metadata. And I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed to be walked out of your own house." "I walked," I said. "Out and in." We hung up. Another buzz, a new number. Unknown, nice gate, shame about the timestamp. A photo loaded. Me small in the frame at the wrought iron V, hand on the intercom, head turned. The angle was high, like a bird or a security camera. The timestamp burned into the corner. 5:12:08 p.m. In the far left edge, blurred and barely there, a figure on a bench by the manicured verge. A groundskeeper with my blazer on his shoulders, except anyone who didn't know would only see a shape. Under the photo, a link, clip entry porch audio. Wav, my thumb hovered. I didn't tap. Not because I didn't want to hear my own humiliation, but because I could already hear it. Ethan's voice sharpened by fear and the angle of a microphone, mine steady the way steadiness sounds like cold on video. A final text arrived, no number, just no caller ID like a mask. "Sleep well, MS Park. Cameras love a story that starts on a porch." I woke to my mother's kettle and my phone vibrating itself across the nightstand like it wanted out. The lock screen was a rash of alerts. Trending, heiress to be melts down at mansion gate audio. A still of me at the wrought iron V, head turned, hand lifted, the timestamp loud as a tattoo. I tapped. The clip opened on a waveform and the sound of our breath. Then Ethan's voice, spiked by fear and microphones. "You are 17 minutes late, 17. My voice, steady enough to sound cold. He was bleeding. Cut to music to bloggers who pronounce judgment like they're taking attendance. The caption, "Nonprofit saint meets punctuality." My stomach went hollow. My mother set coffee beside the phone. "They don't care who bleeds," she said. "They care who sells." The board chair from the garden called before I could swallow. "Lena, 2 anchors froze disbursements until this wave passes. PR wants a statement by noon." "And theirs," she hesitated. "A concerns doc from an anonymous donor about restricted funds for mentor pizza nights. We know it's petty, it does not matter." "We have permissions," I said. "On paper," she said. "But they buy headlines, not paper. Can you come in?" "Can't," I said. "I have an 8 a.m. at Vale and a fraud affidavit at the bank." "That's a lot for morning," she said, and hung a promise at the end of it. "We'll hold the row until you get here." A text from no caller ID. "You can't be 2 places at once, MS Park." I dressed in my father's office, the couch sheet creased into my cheek, the petal from the velvet envelope tucked into my wallet like a saint's card. I called Camille. "Meet me," I said. "Where?" "The diner on 4th, 30 minutes. She was already in a booth when I walked in, hair in a messy knot, eyes swollen from a night you don't advertise. She slid a mug toward me. "You saw the clip?" "I heard it," I said. "Somebody lifted the audio off the doorbell, and someone circled my bus pass budget like it was a crime." She looked down. I tried to get ahead of it. "How?" I asked. "Somebody reached out after your dinner," she said. "A boutique shop. They said they could soften anything that hit, trade a bad headline for a boring one. I thought it could protect you." "Who sent them?" "A guy named Rafe," she said. "From Sable and Heart Media." She exhaled. "Don't look at me like that. He said it was standard. Front-run the narrative, find sympathetic angles. Who paid? I said, for your help protecting me. She didn't answer. She opened her laptop. Email after email bloomed, the kind written by people who bill by the minute, who apologize in words that read like invoices. An ACH receipt sat in her downloads, subject line influencer liaison retainer. The payer of record was a subsidiary I knew too well, Fieldstone Holdings. That's Vale, I said. That's Lyle, she said. He said, if you love your friend, help her, we'll onboard you as a liaison and make sure the press treats her kindly. I took the first retainer because, I don't know, because bills and because you never take money from me, and I thought, let me carry a corner of the load for once. By taking their money, I said, and it came out more tired than angry. I didn't know they'd weaponize it, she said. I thought they'd bury it. She pushed the laptop toward me until it knocked my mug. I'm not the villain in your movie, Lena. Maybe not, I said. But you sold programs you didn't understand to people who don't care, and you let them write my name into their script. I touched the receipt. Keep this, keep everything. If you want to be my friend after this, you'll help me burn the right part of the house down. Okay, she whispered. Okay. The bell over the diner door dinged. A man in a peacoat walked in, looked around, and walked out again. The world stayed ordinary, which is how bad days do you. My phone rang. First Meridian Bank. I picked up. MS, Park, the voice said, same woman from last night. We're confirming your arrival. I'm not there yet, I said. My appointment's at 9:30. A small pause, as if someone had erased a line and written it again. We have a MS Park here now requesting early acknowledgement. She presented ID. There's a discrepancy on physical descriptors. Could you confirm your height? 5'3", I said. Thank you, she said, her training batting down any edges. And your hair color is? Black, I said, though in sunlight it pulls red. Understood, she said. This person is 5'9" with blonde hair. We've asked her to wait. We'll be calling building security. Would you prefer we call the police? My mouth went dry. Yes, I said. Call them, and please don't let anyone sign a single thing under my name. We haven't, she said. But please be aware, we also received an email moving your appointment time to 8:15. It came from a Vale Holdings domain. Hold everything, I said. We're trying, she said. One more thing, our docu-track shows a purge request queued for 8:30. If you have evidence, bring it. Every second in my body went tall and thin. I ended the call and stared at the space between my coffee and Camille's hands. Outside, buses shrugged around corners and kids with backpacks knocked shoulders in a storm you don't see until it hits. Go, Camille said. I'll meet you at the bank after. I have an 8 a.m. with Regina, I said, and the clock on the wall said 7:34 and the city said choose. My phone buzzed. Ethan, where are you? Security locked down the main conference. Mother moved the meeting to the greenhouse. She wants you with the envelope. Over it, one more, no caller ID. You can save your name at the bank or your fiancé at his mother's house. Pick a door, MS Park. The waitress refilled cups. Camille's hands shook as she texted me the Sable and Heart receipts, the email headers, the retainer notes. A boy at the counter laughed at something on his phone. Two old men argued about the Knicks. Everything kept happening like it always does. I stood, the booth vinyl squeaked. I shoved the velvet envelope deep in my tote and felt the pressed pedal shift under my fingers as if it were breathing. Which door? Camille asked. Both, I said, lying to the one person I was still trying not to lie to. I stepped into the cold. My father's car nosed to the curb before I waved him down. He'd been circling because that's what he does when he can't fix a thing with a wrench. I climbed in. Greenhouse or bank, he said. The screen lit with two maps, one to Vale, one to First Meridian. Between them, a new message blinked open, not from a blocked number this time, but from a contact labeled Regina Vale I had not entered. Come now, it read, and bring your grandmother's trick. The greenhouse sat behind the stone house like a glass lung. Warm air fogged the panes. A wet green smell lifted as the door closed behind me. Rows of orchids arched like question marks, roots breathing the air, flowers held up to the morning like verdicts. Regina was waiting in a linen shirt and gardener's clogs, the disguise of a woman who never needs disguise. The butler stood at a respectful distance with a tray, shears, gauze, a small ramekin of something powder fine. Good, Regina said. You brought your grandmother's trick. She was a nurse, I said. Sure, impatience fix half the world, and a clean cut fixes much of the rest. She touched a phalaenopsis with two perfect white blooms and one spike gone brown and slick at the node. Bacterial rot, she said. Spreads if you pretend it won't, would you? I slipped the gauze under the ailing section, found the living green above the soft dark and cut. Sap welled clear as a lie told well. I pressed with gauze until it slowed. What's in the ramekin? I asked. Cinnamon, she said, kitchen antifungal. She watched me dust the wound. Sometimes the oldest powders close the newest cuts. We stood in the wet quiet a beat. Somewhere a misting line side on, side off. Your fiancé, she said, as if saying his name would waste time, will tell me something true in 1 hour, or he will learn what happens to men who trespass in their own mother's house with borrowed names. I told him to, I said. Of course you did, she said. He needed a spine, you loaned him one, he prefers to rent. I glanced at the tote. The bank called. Someone tried to sign in my name at 8:15. Tall, blonde, they've stalled her. There's a purge queued in Doku track at 8:30. If it runs, the path that shows where my name was dragged will go dark. Regina's eyes did not flicker. Meridian's compliance answers my number, she said, but I don't carry phones into this room. She lifted hers from a pocket, turned it off, and placed it face down on a potting bench like an offering to a god she didn't believe in. Tell me first who you are when no one writes it down. I'm a girl who grew up on linoleum, I said, and felt the truth settle into the leaves. Who watched her mother put her own shoes on after a 12-hour shift because somebody else's mother needed a hand. I'm a woman who knows cucumbers go bitter when you water for show. I'm not a notarized convenience. Useful, she said, because I'm about to ask you to choose a life where you will be believed only after you prove it twice. She pointed with her chin toward a bank of orchids grown like a small forest, white moths, yellow throats, freckles of plum. I built my empire on leverage and appetite, she said. Then I learned appetite without governance eats your children. The Vale Community Fund is a thing I designed when I began to suspect I had forgotten why money should exist. 9 figures. Hard rules. No pageantry. I want you to run it. The air went thinner and bigger at once. Me, you, she said. Because you gave your blazer to a stranger, and because you kept your name when it would have been cheaper to sell it, and because you cut rot clean instead of polishing it. The fund needs someone who understands that money is not meaning, only a tool you sterilize before you touch people with it. The tray's scissors flashed a soft blade of light across my knuckles. There are conditions, I said, because of course there were. 3, she said. Transparency you can see from space, every dollar out, every vendor named, the courage to be hated by people who prefer fog. And she looked past me toward the house, toward the room where men practiced sounding reasonable, no divided loyalties. You want me to leave Ethan, I said. It wasn't a question. I want you to stop believing you can save a man who asks you to disappear so he can stay whole, she said. But I'm not the judge of your heart. I will make you an honest bargain. She lifted a folder from a shelf, thick paper, the kind that makes noise when you breathe on it. She opened it and turned it so the pages faced me. On top, Vale Community Fund Interim Director Authority with my name typed clean. Beneath it, special measures, compliance, temporary mandate, a document that looked less like a job and more like a scalpel. And under that, a 1-page letter on the same courthouse serif that rode my nightmare last night. If Ethan gives a full accounting today, names the devices, returns the drives, and commits to a year of unglamorous work where people don't learn his name from a plaque, she said, you and he may marry with my unopposed blessing, and you may still take the fund. He will have no vote at Vale for 12 months. He will sign no document that binds anyone but himself. He will sit in rooms where the decision is which seed tray to water, and he will learn how to wipe down a table. And if he refuses, she closed the folder. Then you will break off your engagement, and I will hire you anyway. Vale will proceed against your forgers, and I will not spend 1 cent to protect Ethan from consequences he insists he cannot smell. I looked at my hands. Cinnamon clung to the lines like dust from a workday. That's not mercy. I said, no, she said. It's grace with terms. Mercy forgives without asking a thing of the person who wrecked the room. Grace asks them to sweep. I thought of Ethan's face at our kitchen table, the way his apology trembled because it was new to him. I thought of the docked paychecks my mother took without complaint because the unit was short and the work had to be done. I thought of the kids at the garden arguing about whether jalapenos were brave or stupid. You tested me in a ditch, I said. You let me think a stranger needed my sandwich, that's theater. I tested the person who would enter my house, she said. I do not apologize for requiring a demonstration when my sons have made a meal of pretending. You can loathe my methods and accept my help at once. MS Park. Adults hold more than one object in their hands. I opened my mouth and closed it again. The misting line sighed back on, beads formed on the edge of a broad green leaf and fell on the soil like punctuation. A shadow crossed the glass. The butler stepped closer, head inclined, voice low. MS, Vale. He said, a call from First Meridian Compliance is holding at your office line. They report a woman presenting MS, Park's name and identification, and a purge request on the Doku track queue. Regina didn't look away from me, and they ask whether they should involve the district attorney's office, he said. They also request confirmation whether the woman should be detained. She is insistent. Who is she? I asked, and the question wasn't air. It'd weight. The butler's eyes moved an imperceptible degree, as if not quite landing on my face. They describe her as 5'9" blonde. The diner's vinyl squeak ran through me like a movie splice. Camille's messy knot, the emails with Rafe. The retainer stamped Fieldstone Holdings. My phone vibrated in my tote, a wasp in a jar. A text flashed on the lock screen from a number I knew by the ache in my chest. Camille, I'm at the bank. Don't be mad. They said if I didn't help. Shall I answer Meridian MS Vale? The butler said as if we had been discussing the weather. Regina did not move. No, she said. MS Park will. She stepped back from the bench, gave me the space her sons never earned, and nodded at the office door beyond the ferns. The phone kept buzzing. The misting line hissed. The cut spike we had dusted with cinnamon glistened, then settled, closed for now, not healed. I reached for the office door, and the phone at once, and realized my hand could only do one. Pick the office line. First Meridian Compliance, a woman said, brisk over a hum of printers. This is Lena Sunpark, I said. The person in your lobby is not me. Do not let her sign. Call the district attorney. She may be a witness, not a criminal. And freeze the docu track purge queued for 8:30. We've halted signature, she said. Security is with her now. We've also placed a litigation hold on all audit trails. Your note is recorded. My friend may have been coerced, I said. Her name is Camille Duval. Be kind, not lenient. We can do both, she said. If you have artifacts. I'm bringing photos, emails, vendor receipts, I said. 15 minutes. When I hung up, Regina was already halfway down the greenhouse path, clogs tapping. Come, she said. It's time to find out if your fiancé prefers truth to oxygen. The Vale boardroom looked like a courtroom they'd hired a decorator to soften. Walnut paneled the walls. A live fig tree pretended light reached this far. The long table gleamed, places set with water and law. Along one wall, a screen waited with the patience of a trap. Directors filtered in. Gray hair, quiet watches. One woman with eyes that could separate rumor from revenue with a blink. Lyle walked in late, the exact right kind of casual. A tie nodded to look like he hadn't worried it in the car. Ethan was already in his chair, hands flat as paper. He didn't look at me. He looked at the folder in front of him like it was a door he'd promised to open. Regina took the head seat without ceremony. We will be brief, she said. Briefness is a courtesy money owes to time. To the compliance lead, MS Ortega. A woman from the far end clicked a remote. The screen lit with a heat map of access events. Nodes, timestamps, a pulse of red around a device tag, LGMBA 07. Our DocuTrack console shows repeated credentialing into MS. Park's e-signature profile from this workstation, Ortega said. It corresponds to Mr. Lyle Grant's assigned MacBook. We also logged a purge request queued today at 08:30 from the same device. Lyle smiled the way people do when they've practiced for mirrors. Our floor uses pooled devices, he said. Initials on a sticker don't prove authorship. Ortega didn't blink. We don't use stickers, she said. We use hardware ID, geotags, and keystroke patterns. This pattern is yours. Murmurs rolled the length of the table. Lyle spread his hands. We were under timing pressure. Delegated credentials are common for prelim filings. Nothing funds without wet signatures. There's no harm if MS Park acknowledges today. She won't, I said, and the quiet that followed wasn't polite. It was a knife being set down so we could talk about it. Regina's gaze didn't move. Mr. Vale, Ethan swallowed. His voice cracked, then found asphalt. I asked Lyle to buy us time. I told myself it was administrative. It wasn't. It was wrong. I am here to say it out loud. Who initiated the purge? Ortega asked. Lyle glanced at him, then back at the room. Housekeeping, he said lightly. We tidy our logs. Only criminals and toddlers call destruction tidying, Regina said. What else did you tidy? Lyle exhaled through his nose, a man weary of other people's theatrics. Look, I can give you everything. Vendor shells, the Sable and Hart PR pipeline, the people who fed your doorbell audio to the tabloids. In exchange, I want what adults give in messy divorces, immunity for cooperation. Heads turned toward Regina the way sunflowers follow light. She let the request sit next to the water glasses and fog up. Before she could answer, Ortega clicked again. The screen switched. The mansion gate, the clipped hedge, me and a small figure at the intercom. This wasn't the tabloid cut. It ran long, sound clean. Ethan's voice was still a knife, but now it had a handle, his fear, the angle of him, his hands shaking. 17 minutes, he said on the video, the sound filling the room that had raised him. You realize she times everything. I saw someone bleeding, my voice said. No soundtrack, no snare drum, just the sentence. Then the moment the tabloids cut, the breath before he was a groundskeeper and I. And then more, the part where I said, I gave him my coat. And the part where Ethan whispered, please don't make this harder. And the part where I said, I won't be made. The video ended. No one spoke. Regina's chin tipped an inch. Context is a solvent, she said mildly. It dissolves certain adhesives. Across the table, Lyle's jaw ticked. His phone lit under his hand face down, a small glow like a guilty thought. He turned it over, glanced, and didn't quite keep the smile out of his mouth. Ortega tapped again. Another slide. Fieldstone Holdings, PR retainers, wire lines stacking into a column the color of blood. Recipient, Sable and Heart Media. Description, Influencer Liaison, CD. Copies of ACH receipts. Redaction box over the account had been slid aside enough to show the last 4 digits. Camille had already sent me the originals. I'd sent them at 8:11 to Ortega's secure inbox. Your liaison attempted to impersonate MS. Park at First Meridian this morning, Ortega said, calm as a weather report. Bank security has detained her pending a statement and DA presence. The bank also reports an attempted email to move MS. Park's appointment up. Sent from a veiled domain. Eyes moved to Lyle because they had a place to land there. He lifted a shoulder as if the air had gotten warm. Overzealous contractors, he said. We can all be grateful nothing happened. Regina folded her hands, the tendons delicate as orchid roots and twice as strong. Mr. Grant, you have asked for immunity. In my house, you may ask for air and get it. You may ask for water and get none. Lyle leaned forward. If you want the full map, I'm the only person who can draw it while anyone still cares. Regina looked past him to Ethan. If the ground is a place where a man can stand and not slide, this is your chance to find it. Ethan's knuckles whitened. He pushed his chair back, stood, and did not look at Lyle. I told him to cue the guarantee, he said. I didn't know he'd try to purge logs. I didn't know about the bank impersonation. I didn't ask for the doorbell audio to be leaked. But I let him write my fear in my fiancé's name. I am sorry. I am ready to tell the DA everything I know and sign whatever keeps MS. Park safe. The woman with the blink that killed rumor nodded once to herself as if a note had balanced. Someone at the far end muttered, about time. Lyle laughed, not nicely. Apology tours don't erase acknowledgements that haven't happened yet, he said. His phone hummed again. He looked, this time the smile grew teeth. And anyway, he added, casual as salt, housekeeping finishes at 8:30. On the wall, the audit console flickered. A banner crawled up from the bottom, white on gray. Docatrack, purge complete, local logs cleared, initiated. LGMBA 07083001. Ortega swore under her breath and started typing. Local only, she said, almost to herself. External mirrors hold. Meridian's litigation freeze should have caught bankside trails. Across the table, relief leaked out of Lyle in a little sigh. He set his phone down as if placing a bet he liked. So, he said, all bland manners. MS Park, you were going to say something to the board. I stood so my knees wouldn't remember shaking. The audit console still showed the gray banner, purge complete, like a lie that wanted to be a fact. I didn't sign, I said to the table. I will not acknowledge or reaffirm a guarantee I never saw. My name is not a bridge for men who ran out of shore. If you need a statement for Meridian and the DA, print that. No one moved. Then the director with the rumor-killing blink tipped her pen once, as if to pin the moment to the board minutes. I have photographs of the documents, email receipts for the PR retainers, and the doorbell clip in full, I went on. I also have the envelope MS, Vale sent home with me and the pedal pressed inside it. None of those are legal arguments. They are artifacts, a chain of choices. Start there. Lyle gave me a smile meant for interns. Artifacts are pretty, we're doing law. Good, I said, because the bank is holding your law in a litigation freeze. Ortega's hands were already moving. External mirrors are alive, she said without looking up. Meridian confirms their hold. They'll image anything you touched the last 10 days. Across the table, Ethan's eyes found mine and didn't ask for rescue. I knew what I was doing when I borrowed your name, he said. His voice wasn't loud, it was clear. I won't let Lyle borrow it again to save me. Regina folded her hands. Then be brief. He faced the room. I told Lyle to cue the guarantee. I told myself we'd unwind it before it mattered. I let him move money from shells with my initials on them because I liked the story where that wasn't theft if nobody got hurt. He swallowed. I am prepared to resign any authority you give me, surrender my vote, repay, personally, what can be traced, and sign a statement for Meridian and the DA. A murmur passed like weather. Lyle's jaw flexed. You're confessing to an administrative convenience, he said, patient as a man reading to a child. Don't make it poetry. It was cowardice, Ethan said, and it made room for crime. He sat. Silence took a chair. Regina turned to the directors. MS. Ortega, draft the following. Immediate suspension of Mr. Grant pending termination for cause. Referral to authorities with full cooperation. Total freeze and review of all Fieldstone-related vendors. Mandatory two-person credentialing for any e-signature tied to the holding company. Third-party audit of PR spend. and a written policy that names are not delegated without notarized consent. She glanced at Ethan. Mr. Vale's voting rights are suspended for 12 months. If he repays and completes a year of service at the community fund as a rank-and-file employee, he may petition for restoration. There will be no compensation during that year. He will sign nothing that binds anyone but himself. No one mistook it for theatrics. One director cleared his throat. Second, any opposition? Regina asked. Lyle lifted a hand as if he were stretching. Before you ossify moral superiority, he said, consider that without me. Your mirrors are a funhouse. I can walk you straight through Sable and Hart and the vendor daisy chain right to the men feeding your gate audio. That's worth something. It's worth your lawyer's time, Regina said. Call him. He laced his fingers. Call yours first, Regina, he said, with a softness that wasn't kindness. Ask her where your little costume tests land on entrapment statutes once a plaintiff's lawyer decides a billionaire staged scenarios to humiliate guests for sport. Ask her what a jury hears when a powerful woman puts people in disguises and films reactions. Ask her if that plays like character vetting or cruelty with better silverware. The room held its breath. Regina didn't flinch. I don't need to film what money already does to people, she said. It's loud enough. Lyle's phone hummed. He looked, and for the first time since he'd come in, he lost color. Well, he said lightly, they walk fast. The glass doors opened without a knock. Two people from the DA's office came in with a detective and a bank compliance officer I recognized by her voice. Their presence didn't shout, it canceled. MS. Vale, the lead Ada said, polite as a dentist. Subpoena deuces Techum. Devices, logs, internal emails, and access to DocuTrack. Mr. Grant, you'll come with us. Lyle stood with the ease of a man who likes hallways. Counsel will meet us downtown, he said. We'll be cooperative. Great, the detective said, not smiling. He took Lyle's phone. Start by cooperating this. The bank officer, Meridian, neat bun tightening against the day, inclined her head toward me. MS Park, thank you for the warning. MS, Duval is safe. She's given a statement that she was hired to stabilize optics and told to present to our desk to fix an administrative mismatch. She has counsel, so do you if you want it. I want to sign an affidavit, I said, and I want your IT to image anything in this building with my name on it. We're here to do exactly that, she said. Regina rose. The room seemed to adjust around her. You have our cooperation, she said to the Ada. I have one request, a copy of whatever you seize from Mr. Grant's machine related to PR retainers, media leaks, and bank impersonation. We have civil actions to prepare. We'll see what the judge allows, the Ada said. Ethan's chair scraped softly. I'll come with you, he told the Ada. To give a statement. She nodded. After we collect Mr. Grant, yes. She glanced at Ortega's screens. And you might want to stop your local purges. Already done, Ortega said, dry as dust. Lyle looked at me as if I'd tracked mud into a room he liked clean. You're burning the house you plan to move into, he said. I'm cutting rot before it spreads, I said. There's a difference. The Ada turned toward the door with Lyle between the detectives. The board shuffled papers as if paper could make air normal. Regina slid a single sheet to Ortega. Draft public language, she said. Plain sentences, no adjectives, post at noon. Ethan put his hands on the back of his chair and didn't grip. He looked like a man trying to stand still on a deck that wanted to pitch. I'll go to the greenhouse after, he said to Regina, if you'll have me. You'll go where Meridian tells you for now, she said, then softer. After, yes, there's soil that needs moving. The DA's team reached the door. The bank officer paused by me. One more question, she said low. Who authorized the mirror outside the building, the third-party backup that captured the purge? We have Meridians, Veils, and a third one that lit up at 8:10 with admin tags that don't belong to either system. I didn't, Ortega said, already typing. We only mirrored Bankside and our off-site cold storage. A third. The officer tapped her folder. Tag reads RV route. Heads turned to Regina as if pulled. She didn't blink. I like my evidence where frightened men can't reach, she said. Ortega's screen chimed. External mirror sync complete. Relief loosened the room by a notch. We were almost out of air when the butler slipped in, unobtrusive as heat. He bent to Regina, murmured, retreated. She looked at me. There's someone at the gate, she said. Says she's here for you. I felt the answer arrive before the words. Camille, I said. Not MS, Duval, the butler said. A woman who says she represents your nonprofit's largest donor. She has a letter. What letter? I asked, though I knew what kind it would be. Regina slid a hand toward the velvet envelope on the table beside me, as if to remind me how paper can weigh more than metal. She says, the butler finished, apologies folded into his voice. They are revoking your funding, effective immediately. The woman from the foundation wore a blazer the exact color of a closed door. She stood just inside the boardroom and handed me a letter with a smile tuned to inevitable. "MS. Park," she said. "We admire your mission. In light of recent optics and governance concerns, our board is suspending and then revoking support effective immediately. We wish you well." "Governance," I said. "You mean someone forged my name and your PR shop helped sell the clip?" "I mean," she said, "we don't fund chaos." Her gaze slid past me to Regina the way people look for the largest planet in a room. "MS. Vale." Regina didn't rise to meet the glance. "Names are not chaos," she said. "Men who borrow them are." The woman cleared her throat. "Public-private partnerships depend on trust." "Then trust this," I said, heat coming slow and clean. "I will publish every dollar you gave us and every dollar we spent. The emails approving bus passes and pizza slices and dirt. And I will publish your retained vendor list if it intersects with Sable and Hart." Her smile thinned. "Good luck." She left the way money leaves, quietly and early. I folded the letter twice. My hands wanted to shake, I didn't let them. In my ear I heard my mother's voice at a kitchen table counting old bills into piles. "We don't own much, honey. We own what we do next." In the hallway, Camille waited with a manila envelope hugged to her chest. Her eyes were raw. "They let me go," she said. "Bank security. The DA took my statement." She opened the envelope with trembling fingers and slid out a portable drive, scuffed, labeled in Sharpie, S&H pipeline/Fieldstone. "Rafe sent me the wrong link once," she whispered. The whole playbook was behind it. Stabilize optics. Starve adversaries. Reframe leaks as community concern. I kept the mirror because I thought someday I'd need to remember who I was. "I'm sorry I needed it for this." "You were hired to love me quietly," I said. "You got paid to help them hurt me louder." "I know," tears stood and didn't fall. "I can be better than the girl who took the first retainer. Let me try." I took the drive. "You already started." We walked to the elevator. Through the glass, we could see the greenhouse roof flashing like a wet scale in the sun. For a blink, I was 10, in a church basement, my mother tucking bobby pins into my hair and saying, "Stand still," and me standing as still as I could while wanting to run. Downstairs, the day watched us. Reporters lingered at the gate like birds who had learned where the bread falls. A camera lifted. Camille squeezed my arm, then peeled off sideways, a woman returning to her own bad decisions to clean them. I found Ethan by the service drive, flanked by 2 detectives and Meridian's compliance officer. He looked heavy and light at once, like a man who had unloaded a piano and found his hands empty. "They took Lyle," he said, voice hoarse. "Forgery, identity theft, obstruction, there'll be more." "And you?" I asked. "I gave my statement," he said. "No deals, just truth." He scrubbed his face with his palm. The Ada asked if I wanted counsel. I said I wanted a job that wasn't about blur. "You'll have one," Regina's voice said behind us. She didn't come close, she let the sentence carry its own legs. "After Meridian finishes with you, the greenhouse needs gravel moved. The west beds flood after storms because the pitch is wrong." Ethan nodded like a man told where to put his apology. "Yes, ma'am." The compliance officer touched my sleeve. "We'll need your photos and that drive," she said, eyes flicking to Camille's Sharpie label. "We'll receipt them." I handed them over. "I have a foundation to call," I said, a lie to give my feet direction. At the garden that afternoon, the kids were waiting with the soil pH kit like it was a video game. "MS-P," Tasha said. The mayor's account retweeted the clip with a heart, but like an ironic heart. "That's a regular heart with bad manners," I said. "Let's test plot 4. Ethan arrived at 3 with a borrowed wheelbarrow and a shovel older than both of us. The first time a paparazzi lens slid over the fence, he flinched. The second time, he straightened his back and kept shoveling crushed stone into the muddy trench like the work could edit the picture. The kids watched him sideways, the way children watch whether learning a new trick. "Hey," Tasha called, bold as only a 14-year-old can be. "You the man from the clip who doesn't like late." "I'm the man from the clip who was wrong," he said, and kept moving. The rumor-killing board member texted me at 4, press at noon. Policy language attached. Plain as a broom. Lyle was arraigned by 5. The local news ran his perp walk looped with his LinkedIn headshot, the cut of his suit doing him no favors. Commenters typed fast. Some were cruel, some were precise. It didn't matter. The law would move on feet, not fingers. By 6, my inbox held 2 more revocations and a threat from a landlord whose nephew had read the headlines and decided charity didn't make as nice a story as condos. 30 days to vacate, his lawyer wrote per terms. Nonprofit reputation clauses apply. By 7, the kids had gone and the garden was just beds and air. Ethan stacked the last bag of gravel and sat on the curb, panting. He looked up at me like he'd been underwater for a very long time. "I sold the car," he said. "And the watches. Called the broker to list the apartment. I'll sign whatever they put in front of me at Meridian. I'm not asking for credit, I'm trying to make a clean line. A wind came up and rattled the chain link like a tired tambourine. My phone buzzed my mother, asking if I was eating. I stared at the soil and remembered being 8, losing a tooth at the bus stop, and how my father made a joke so I wouldn't cry. You didn't lose it, kiddo, you planted it. There's a new one coming. Headlights swept the beds. A black sedan rolled to the curb and idled. Regina stepped out alone, no clack of shoes that weren't hers, no butler with an umbrella. She stood on our cracked sidewalk like a queen who'd decided to visit a republic. I read your landlord's letter, she said. A man with a nephew and a taste for quick math. I have 30 days, I said, and about 3. Less, she said. He'll find a code violation and accelerate. Men like him use building inspectors the way other men use weather apps. I don't have the money to fight, I said. I have receipts and a shovel. Regina looked at Ethan. Shovel I can use, she said. Her gaze returned to me. My offer stands. She didn't repeat it, she didn't need to. I won't leave the kids, I said. Then bring them, she said, to a place that won't be bulldozed by a nephew who learned his morals at a closing. The last light leaked out of the sky. Somewhere a siren wound down. A moth knocked itself against the street lamp like it owed the bulb money. Say yes, Ethan said, quiet. I took a breath and tasted metal and cinnamon and long days. Yes, I said to Regina. On my terms. I listed them. Transparency so bright it would scare insects. A firewall between the fund and veil businesses. Written protections for the kids, the mentors, the messy nights when someone's mother didn't come home, and we stayed late to plant something instead of thinking. Done, she said, as if I had asked for chairs. One more, I said, and the courage it took came from my mother's shoes and my father's wrenches. Ethan works a year where he can't sign a single thing for anyone but himself. If he finishes it, we start again. If he doesn't, we end clean. Regina's mouth warmed by 1 degree. You negotiate like a person who has been poor, she said. It tends to produce better contracts. She turned to leave, then paused. Bring your shovel to the mansion at 9 tomorrow. You've got a greenhouse to build in the yard that used to host my parties. What about the garden? I asked, looking at the beds like I was looking at photographs of my own bones. She glanced at the chain link, at the cracked sidewalk, at the landlord's notice clipped inside the gate. You'll move what you can, she said. You'll leave what you must. Roots break, wings learn. Her sedan slid away. The night returned. We locked the gate. Ethan lifted the wheelbarrow into the shed and left it exactly right. When we turned toward the street, 2 trucks rolled to a stop at the curb, orange lights strobing. Men in city jackets climbed down, carrying sawhorses and rolls of yellow tape. Evening, the older one said, not unkind. Code enforcement. We got a notice about unstable fencing and improper lighting. Temporary closure pending inspection. We have kids here, I said. Tomorrow? Not tomorrow, he said, and set a sawhorse down with the finality of gravity. He unrolled the tape across the gate, a caution ribbon clean as a throat cut. He stapled a paper to the fence, official notice, then stepped back. I read the stamp. My stomach went cold. Effective immediately, access suspended. Demolition permit under review. Hearing 10:00 a.m. tomorrow. Under review was the kind of phrase that meant the machines were already warming. The older man tipped his cap. Sorry, he said, and meant it. We stood there with our keys in our hands and nowhere to put them. The beds we'd turned all spring were suddenly on the other side of a line drawn by a nephew and a city with too many friends. My phone buzzed one last time. No caller ID, plant fast, MS Park. Some seeds don't wait for courts. I barely slept. At 9:50, the municipal hearing room was full of board chairs and people who weren't. Kids from the garden sat in the front row like they'd been told to behave in church. My mother squeezed my hand until the bones learned their lines. Ethan stood behind us, collar open, the way men dress for a sentence. Regina sat 2 rows back with no entourage, just the quiet that works like gravity. Case number 1437, the clerk said. Temporary closure and demolition review, parcel 8-17C. The landlord's nephew had a haircut that believed in itself and a lawyer who said community character like it was a dessert we hadn't earned. Unsafe fencing, improper lighting, vagrancy. Kids, I said, he means kids. The city inspector who'd posted the notice spoke like a man who hated being used. Fence needs a brace, lights need a shield, a warning would have fixed both. The hearing officer flipped through photos. Who filed the complaint? She asked. The nephew lifted his chin. A concerned neighbor. Regina unfolded one long sheet like a magician's scarf. Your Honor, she said, voice all bone. Before we pretend fences topple themselves, I'd like to submit emails between the complainant and a PR vendor paid by Fieldstone Holdings, Mr. Grant's shell. The subject line is starve adversaries. The body reads, leverage code, schedule demo before ink. The room changed temperature. The officer scanned the printouts, jaw tightening by degrees. Motion to stay demolition pending ethics review, she said. The clerk's pen scratched. Temporary closure is lifted for remediation. You have 72 hours to brace the fence and shield the lights. After that, any kid who wants dirt under their nails gets it. The kids started to clap and then stopped when no one else did, then started again because they were kids. The nephew's lawyer asked to be heard. This is irregular. Chaos is irregular, the officer said without looking up. A community garden fixing a brace is government. Regina didn't look at me, she didn't need to. Outside, she nodded once at a man idling in a truck the size of a decision, and 3 more pulled in behind him, lumber, posts, gravel, a portable light kit. You like shovels? She asked Ethan. I do now, he said, already moving toward the bed of the first truck. We braced the fence before the sun burned off the frost. Old men and kids, and a billionaire with dirt on her clogs. Tasha learned to tie rebar wire without pinching her fingers. A teenager who never smiled when the post hole digger bit straight and true. Camille arrived with a box of bagels and a paper from the DA's office stamped with words I wanted to keep under my tongue. Criminal investigation, identity theft, subpoena served. By dark, the sawhorses were stacked in a corner like apologies. We strung work lights across the beds and planted starts from trays the kids had nursed in windowsills. It wasn't everything. It was enough. 3 months later, the greenhouse on the Vale lawn opened its lungs. The sign read Roots and Wings Conservatory because the kids had voted, and because the world had a sense of humor some days. The chandelier over the old dining room had been rewired. We hung it in the entry and filled it with potting soil and thyme. People came in clothes that could get dirty. No ribbon cutting, just a table with lemonade and a jar where you could put $1 or a note. Ortega from compliance wore jeans and looked as if sunlight surprised her. The rumor-killing board member set down a stack of new policies on a crate and said to no one in particular, plain sentences, no adjectives. Regina arrived in a jacket the color of navy I knew by heart. My blazer had been cleaned, repaired where I'd torn it with my grandmother's handkerchief, the seams stronger than they'd been. She wore it like borrowed weather, then took it off and hung it by the door with the rest. Some things you return, she said. Some you keep until they mean something. Ethan stood up on a bench and cleared his throat. The kids cheered because the short people in any room are kinder. He didn't ask for quiet, he waited for it. I was a man who wanted to look like a good one, he said. Then I became a man who wanted to be one. He looked at me and didn't look away. She saved me by not saving me. I'm sorry, thank you, I'll earn this. It wasn't a speech for a plaque. It was an offering that knew it might not be accepted. He came down and didn't go to me because he'd learned patience. I went to him because I'd learned grace with terms. In the corner by the potting bench, he took a breath that sounded like gravel being tamped flat. I want to ask again, he said, to begin again. This time we sign only our own names. We will, I said. On paper you don't write for me. We listed them where anyone could overhear. A prenup that had clauses about money and about work. Separate accounts and a ledger for shared things. No access to the fund from Vale Business. A year more of labor where his hands did the talking. If you break a term, we don't break each other, we end clean. He nodded. In his palm, a simple band waited, not a promise but a tool. He didn't put it on my hand. I did. The kids clapped again, softer this time, like rainfall. Regina moved through the room reading flowers with her fingers the way other people read type. When she reached me, she lifted something from her bag, a scarf, the exact weight of winter. She wrapped it around my shoulders. Warm, she said. Enough, I said, and for a moment we stood like a truce that had remembered why it started. After the speeches that weren't speeches, work resumed because plants do not recognize ceremonies. I crouched to help one of the interns knot his laces before he turned a flat of basil. The lace snapped, old and thin. I tied what was left, 2 loops that would hold long enough to get him home. M.S.P., Tasha said, tugging my sleeve. A lady left this for you. She held up a small square of velvet the color of wine. Not an envelope this time, a box. It weighed more than it should. The butler stood by the door as if he'd grown there, eyes polite and seeing. He tipped his head the smallest degree as I opened the lid. Inside lay a key, old brass with a notch carved by use. Beneath it, folded twice, a deed abstract and a letter on courthouse paper. Parkland Community Land Trust Trustee, Lena Sun Park, Parcel 8-17C, the lot where we'd learned to brace fences. The letter was 1 line in Regina's hand. Some things you leave, some you take back and hold for others. RV something caught in my throat that wasn't a sob and wasn't a laugh. The kids hovered, all eyes and no restraint. My father, across the room, saw my face and put his hand on his heart like a man watching a landing. A phone vibrated in my pocket, the old wasp in the old jar. No caller ID, nice key. Gates aren't the only things that open. I turned. Through the glass of the conservatory, I could see the dark box of the old lot across the street, the chain link a black grid. A fresh padlock glinted on the gate as if it had been waiting for a century and a morning. "Go," my mother said behind me out of nowhere, the way she appears when I need to be nudged toward the next right thing. She pressed the scarf tighter around my neck. Keys don't like to be kept waiting. I stepped into the night with the kids crushed behind the windows and the adults pretending they weren't watching. The air smelled like mint and rain and a city trying to make room for its better ideas. At the gate, the brass felt warm like a living thing. I slid the key in. It caught, turned, yielded with the quietest click, a sound like a door remembering it had once been kinder. From inside the dark, a string of lights blinked on one by one, a path tracing itself through beds that had not existed this afternoon. A shadow moved at the far end, slight, familiar. A cap tipped. A voice, low and amused, drifted across the garden. "Evening, MS Park," it said. "Thought you might be late."